Watashi ga motte nai no wa do kate kangate mo omaira ga warui. Watashi ga motte nai no wa do kangate mo omaira ga warui. Watashi ga motte nai no wa do kangaite mo omaira ga warui. Watashi ga motte nai no wa do kangatai mo omaira ga warui. Watashi ga motte nai no wa do kangaite mo omaira ga warui, or Watamote for the sane people, is an anime about the high school freshman Tomoko Kudoki, a socially retarded otaku who starts off her high school days with one goal: to
become famous.
Become popular. It's a dedicated comedy following her allegedly trivial quest for self-improvement. Watamote was hyped to high heaven by A, or however the fuck it's verbalized, and for some time, it seemed to actually be living up to the reputation that preceded it. It was hilarious, but more importantly, it was different. The black comedic style it employed was a very refreshing change, namely from the alleged comedies that try to elicit laughter from the viewer by either having moe blobs act retarded, having tsunderes abuse mindless pussies, or throwing some crude, childish, sexual schlock on the screen. The only anime that's comparable in terms of comedic subject matter is Welcome to the NHK, but unlike Watamote, NHK more often made me feel disturbed and uncomfortable in its comedic attempts than make me laugh. Watamote, while having darker comedy, still succeeded frequently in its comedic ventures. When I first heard of Watamote, I was hoping for a show that would do what Welcome to the NHK failed to. While that ended up happening, it wasn't exactly in the respect that I was hoping for. However, Watamote still had a few NHK reminiscent scenes that caused me to shift in my seat, but not nearly as many. Nothing on the level of despicability, such as trying to take upskirt photos of underage schoolgirls. Now, there are plenty of people around the internet whom you'll hear bitching about how they couldn't laugh at the jokes, how it just made them depressed. While it does have a few moments late in the series that are simply not funny and reek of mean-spiritedness, the vast majority of the show is lighthearted. It is funny, but it makes fun of otaku and makes light of situations and problems that are applicable to them, so everyone's up in arms about it. They're butthurt because they don't like having their lifestyle or situation made fun of. It doesn't glorify otakuism, so it's the devil. I can relate to some of the situations and problems depicted in Watamote, but you don't see me fucking crying about it. To decry the whole thing as evil for these few moments shows a very apparent inability to look in the mirror and laugh at yourself once in a while. There was outrage even early in the show, long before any of those moments came along. Fucking lighten up, you crybabies. Basically, if you're an easily offended pussy who lacks interpersonal skills, you should close this video right now and keep anything related to Watamote far from your easily shattered heart. You probably also pine for that farce known as political correctness. Rant over. Some of my favorite comedic bits involve Tomoko's brother's reactions to her antics, though unfortunately, there weren't very many scenes of that. There are also numerous references, though these are pretty hit and miss, some more blatant than others, and the verbal ones of names of characters from shows, that are always partially censored, are mostly just pointless. Except the Kimi ni Todoke reference, that one was great, and the Death Note homage. But it of course has to reference Haruhi Suzumiya, like every other fucking anime with references ever. It can get pretty dry sometimes. One episode didn't even make the corner of my lip twitch until about halfway through. The lack of willingness to break from the mold of its original premise and evolve the comedy was one of the biggest flaws in the show, and my ability to enjoy the comedy evaporated as the season progressed. Also, this fact, combined with the fact that Tomoko doesn't really catch any breaks along the way or get out of her situation in any way, can be kind of depressing. Like I said, there were a few times late in the series where it didn't feel like it was trying to make jokes. It felt like it was just being mean-spirited. It makes one wonder how far they really want to take her situation without actually making jokes about it. The last several episodes are notably less funny than the rest, and are mostly boring and, more importantly, depressing. They dropped the ball pretty hard. It would have been pretty easy to progress her character and still be able to make jokes about her situation. Like, I don't know, Kimi ni Todoke? But nope, guess that would require too much writing prowess. Better stick to our initial premise. Tomoko is the only character with any appreciable amount of depth in the whole thing. She's pretty much a perfectly depicted socially awkward otaku. Even if you aren't as socially inept as she is still very relatable. I could even relate with her in several situations she went through. Her relatability made me kind of baffled that Watamote isn't a more popular show. I mean, she's perfect for otaku to connect to the show. Is it just because she's a girl and otaku are just so bankrupt of imagination that they need the character to be male for them to fully relate? Oh, I'm not saying she's a self-insert protagonist. She's very well defined, not some blank flat piece of cardboard. However, like I said, she stays the same throughout the course of the entire show. I was really rooting for her and wanted to see her situation improve, but sadly, it never did. She was also hindered in the fact that she wasn't really given any significant redeeming qualities to make me like her more. Anything she does that appears positive on the surface ultimately turns out to be two-faced, with some selfish ulterior motive behind it. Tomoko uses Japanese memes and slang while she speaks, which is pretty great for defining her character, but will unfortunately inevitably date the show badly and hurt its longevity. Crunchyroll utterly failed in translating them equivalently for us English speakers, so if you're one of the poor saps who actually watched it on their site, well, sucks to be you, because frankly, your version of Tomoko was different from mine, which means it was wrong! Like I said, the side characters have pretty much zero actual depth, but it's not that big of a problem, since we're focusing on Tomoko and Tomoko alone throughout the entire duration of the show. You, however, is a pretty frequent character, and she at least needed to have more depth. One thing that would have been good to explore was her radical change from middle school to high school. I liked Tomoki the most out of the side characters, though again, his character was a bundle of wasted potential. That is, his relationship with his sister was a point of contention in the show, but had a lot of room for growth. The presentation is actually very impressive. The production values aren't the highest, but Silver Link more than makes up for it with sheer creative artistic style. While it obviously at times has some traces of Shaft inspiration seeping through, it manages to create a style all its own. Most of the unique visual styles are used to represent Tomoko's mental state and add gravity to certain situations. Tomoko's character design is also extremely unique, and I loved it. Her appearance is pretty cute, but still designed in a way that made me believe that she would be unappealing. It certainly made for an interesting contrast between her and the normal people around her, who had very typical character designs. This title really put Silverlink on the map for me as a production studio to be on the lookout for, and unlike other anime I could mention, the visual quality stays consistently good throughout, rather than only being occasionally great and cutting corners the rest of the time. I fucking love the opening theme. It's one of those ones that I didn't skip often. The animation during it is also phenomenal. The ED is also pretty cool, but on the complete opposite end of the spectrum in terms of tone and lyrics. There's an interesting dichotomy between the two. The OP is how Tomoko sees her struggles, and the ED is what it actually looks like. Izumi Kita puts on one of the most unique voice acting performances ever. She makes all these weird grunts and guffaws and things that are fantastic at showing Tomoko's mental state. She does every little speech nuance perfectly, from Tomoko's loud outbursts to her quiet muttering. Aside from Izumi Kita's voice acting, there aren't really any noteworthy performances to speak of. Kana Hanazawa does her now the norm, moe-ass voice. The OST also doesn't really stand out. The tracks work great for their respective scenes and that's all. As you can probably assume from what I've said up to now, my enjoyment was really high in the beginning, but dropped off very steeply about halfway through. There were a few instances of random fan service shoved in that felt very out of place, especially the one that they cram in the last episode, which was so random it left me just scratching my head. It felt like a last-ditch effort to generate interest in the Blu-ray volumes. All in all, the show started off with a fresh comedic concept and executed it very well in the first half, but dropped the ball pretty hard in the second half. It refused to go anywhere with its initial premise. It refused to allow Tomoko to develop, it had some moments of outright mean-spiritedness, and in the last episodes, paced the jokes incredibly poorly, resulting in some kinda depressing stretches. Final score, 5.7 out of 10. It's sad that the show turned out the way it did. Early on, I was pissed at the shitty pre-order figures, especially since it started as the best of the summer 2013 anime season. Well, it still is. Everything else was lackluster or just trash. But now, seeing that the writer can't expand upon the original idea, I don't want to see anymore. There's too much repetition for a whole nother season, but it doesn't look like that's going to be very likely anyway, if the sad Blu-ray sales are anything to go by.